Hi, my name is Raymond, and welcome to our African American Genealogy class. We had this class in person and live, but we're recording it now. So let's dig in. So I've been doing genealogy now for about 25 some odd years here at your Clarksville-Montgomery County Public Library. And I wanted to help people. I wanted to kind of start this whole process of like, how do I begin? And that's one of the questions that sometimes we have. How do I get started? How do I do my ancestry? And we always want to find the beginning, the middle, and the end. And hopefully today, with some of the tricks and the tips that we're going to go over in our PowerPoint, we'll be able to show you that. We'll go over, like I mentioned, a PowerPoint, and then we'll actually go on to Ancestry, which can be accessed on our computers here at your library. And we're gonna search for a man by the name of James Clardy. We're gonna discover everything about him, and we're gonna kind of discover everything about his life and all this wonderful stuff. So let's actually begin with the PowerPoint here. Discovering Your Roots, African American Genealogy. Where to begin? Your very first step, because genealogy is personal, it's about you and where you come from. So you want to talk to, if you can, your oldest living relative. It may be a great uncle, a great aunt, a grandparents, things like that. Older folks in your family that'll be able to tell you important information. And the traditional questions are, of course, the who, what, where, and why. So you want to know, where are my grandparents from? Where do they live? What do they do for a living? Because those things are important. And once you have that interview process, you can record it. I always recommend at the very least that you take down notes, that you write down that information. And this is your family, of course, but what you want to do, you're going to remember some of the things, but you may forget important details. So to avoid that, write all that stuff down. You want to connect yourself, as of the time of this recording, to the 1940 census. To the 1940 census. A census is done every 10 years. The very first census was in 1790, and the most recent census that has come out at the time of this recording is 1940. So you want to do that. You want to connect yourself to that 1940 census. At the time of this recording, I'm 42, and what that means is it's my parents, but not really my parents. It's my grandparents. So my grandparents are on that 1940 census. My mom and my dad was born in 1948 and 1947, so they're not on that 1940 census. So that's the kind of steps that you got to do. Remember, write everything down. So you've got all that information in hand. You've got names, you've got dates, you've got pages of notes that you have with you, kind of oddball things like Uncle Bob was a barber, or Aunt Susie had a grocery store down the road, things like that. Important details that you want to kind of remember and capture, because that information may be on the census. So when we go and we'll visit Ancestry after the PowerPoint, will show you that you want to look at the original document, because sometimes the transcription doesn't have everything on it. Some of the things to consider and have in the back of your mind when you are doing your ancestry are, is this my ancestor? Is this a name that's spelled correctly? For example, someone with a birth name of Elizabeth can be known as Bessie, can be known as Liza, can be known as Eliza, and the variations. My first name is Raymond, but some people call me Ray. Some people call me Ray. My last name is Rosato. Some people just call me straight up Rosie. So just different variations. And some of that may have been written down on the census. Nicknames have, in many cases, been written on a census. So one thing that's encountered with some things that you may encounter in African American genealogy is discrepancies or errors in age. When we go over a specific man by the name of James Clardy and his kids and his line, we'll see that there's a lot of errors there. Well, sometimes ages won't jive, won't match as you progress backwards in time in those censuses. To help with that, to help with those kind of errors, look at neighbors. The further back in time you go, the phrase, I was born, raised, married, had kids, and died, all in one location, becomes truer. I'm Puerto Rican. My father was in the Army, so we moved around a lot. That really didn't happen prior to the 1940s, 1930s. So when you are looking for your ancestry, when you connect to that 1940 census and start going backwards, you'll start noticing that pattern. If your ancestry is in the New England area or the northern states, the likelihood of them being free is pretty high. If they are in southern states prior to the end of the Civil War, you most likely will have enslaved ancestors. However, it's not always true. On the 1860 census for Montgomery County, on the 1860 census, are approximately about 120 families or so that are Black and they are free. So you may be able to find your ancestry on that 1860 census. And we'll talk about more of that later on. Some other things that you may encounter. You may encounter an ancestor that completely disappears. You know for a fact they live in one spot, they've interacted in that spot, they're homegrown, and suddenly they're gone. For example, James Clardy, he is not on the 1910 census. He's on the 1920 and the 1900, but he's not on that 1910 census. We're going to talk about some other ways of looking. Some of the ways of looking is actually through a telephone directory, which is how I found James Clardy. We'll talk about that here in just a second. Some ancestors, one of my coworker, Jackie, we had done her genealogy. We had done her family line. And one census here, she's Black, and they recorded her ancestry on that census, and I think it was 1900, as white. They got the names, they got the family members, they got all that wonderful stuff, but they recorded the wrong race. You may encounter that. Keep an eye out for that. Sometimes, your ancestry, you may note that you see an M next to the race. And what that means is, it means it's mulatto. And so that means they're half Black and they're half white. And so just keep an eye out there. There's always a story with that. It's like, oh, that's really interesting that you're mixed. There may be a story there that can delve deeper. Some of the things that you may encounter is you may find them, boom, I got them in 1940, boom, I got them in 1930, and you may make your way all the way up to the 1870 wall. And the reason why some genealogists call it the 1870 wall is because, thinking back to our American history that we took, class that we took in high school or something like that. So the Civil War ended in 1865. The Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1862, but didn't take effect till January, New Year's Day of 1863. So we've got a gap between the end of the war, the Emancipation Proclamation, and that very next census, which is 1870. So everyone on the 1870 census is listed as free and is named on that census. The 1860 and backwards, not so much. So you may encounter that wall and it becomes kind of difficult to then navigate. How do we go back further? With James Clardy, he was born into slavery, and we'll talk about slave schedules here in a second. But I want to encourage you always to look. There is always a record of your ancestry. There is always a piece of paper, a document, a note, a letter, something in the Bible, some kind of mention of some kind of your ancestry. Always want to encourage you to look. There's always something. In 1850 and in 1860, there was slave schedules done. A slave schedule, which are incredibly helpful in regards to pointing to the right direction, listed the slave owner by name, and then the gender, and then also the race, if they were Black or if they were mixed or mulatto, how it puts it on the census, on that slave schedule. So it would say Farmer Smith had 3 slaves, 2 men of ages of 20, 10 years old, and a female, who's aged 22, for example. You're going to see a lot of that on there. When we bring up the slave schedules, I'll show you what I mean, how it kind of labels some houses and families that are there. The slave schedules were done at the same time as the other types of censuses. So it's not just your traditional census of who lived where, who was in that household. There was a farming schedule. There was a manufacturing schedule. So there's a sea of schedules and censuses that were done all at the same time, 1850, 1860, 70, and 80. One little hurdle, because we're talking about censuses really quickly, the 1890 census sadly was burnt in a fire in 1921, so that census is gone. And so when you make that jump from 1900 to 1880, Tennessee has a bridge for that. The 1891 male enumeration was a special census done in Tennessee. Other states did different ones, one for 95, one for 92, and so on. But in Tennessee, we're pretty lucky. That census was specifically geared towards males, towards men, and if you were over the age of 21. So you can use this and hopefully find your ancestors on it and do that bridge between 1900 and 1880, and you can kind of do that kind of skip and say, oh, great, he's on here. James Clardy, as an example, I keep mentioning his name. He is on the 1891 census. Your other sources, and we do have some here, right here on my desk here, a wide variety of books about churches, Montgomery County history, local history, historical societies. There are other sources that have, as of yet, not been digitized in your area or where your ancestors lived. So I want to encourage you, in Tennessee, I like to brag about Tennessee, we have 95 counties. All 95 counties have a historical society or an archives and an archivist who is actually there, willing and able to help all who are searching for their ancestry. So when you search in other ways, besides ancestry, besides censuses, besides family Bibles and things like that, there are other sources. And I'll showcase some of them today. These are some of the phenomenal websites that I use a lot. I use Ancestry.com heavily. We have them on our computers on our network here at your Clarksville Public Library. I believe the subscription for it, if you wanted to have a personal account, it's about $200 a year. But here at your library, you can access it for free. The only difference is between a personal account and the one that you have access here, it is one that you can't create a family tree on. When you explore Ancestry, you'll be able to find personal accounts of people doing their genealogy and then making it available to the public. Those you won't be able to do. However, you still have access to those censuses, those death certificates, telephone directories, newspaper articles, things like that. You'll be able to access that. My second favorite site that I like to use is Find a Grave. Find a Grave is a fantastic website. It is a website that anybody can use. I have an account. And I like to use Find a Grave to take pictures of headstones and to locate, when I do research for patrons, to find their ancestries. I can use it to find links, names. Sometimes the individuals that post on Find a Grave, they post headstones, they post transcriptions of obituaries and death certificates. So they post a whole bunch of stuff on there. It's great. It's a great well of information. The next website that I use a lot is Family Search. Family Search is conducted and managed by the LDS Church, Latter-day Saints. And they are a phenomenal source as well. They have the same census information, marriage certificates, you name it, it's pretty much on Family Search. And the great thing that I like about Family Search is that it is free. You have to create an account, but it's free on there. And we'll use both, and I'll showcase both. Third source that's not really here on this screen here is your local archives. I've mentioned that previously, but here in Montgomery County, The wonderful ladies that are over at the Montgomery County Archives are phenomenal and willing to help you in every way, shape, or form to find your ancestry. They have access to deeds, to other court minutes, things that aren't necessarily available at local libraries. And they have all that stuff over there. So we're pretty much finished with our PowerPoint. Now we're going to move into Ancestry. So follow me while we go there. All right, so now we're going to dig into Ancestry using our computers here at the public library. I've already got it up, but an easy way to find it, if it doesn't pop up automatically on our computers, is Clarksville.org. Clarksville.org is our library homepage. And so here it is here in all its wonderful glory. I love our site. I love our folks here. We're going to scroll down, and it'll be on the left-hand side, and you're going to see the word genealogy right there. We're going to click on it. It's going to take you to our genealogy homepage. We're going to scroll down on the right side. It says databases and links. I'm going to click there. We have two phenomenal sources, Ancestry.com, which I've talked about before, and we subscribe to Newspapers.com. Newspapers.com is owned by Ancestry, so you'll see links from Ancestry to Newspapers, and also Ancestry also owns Find a Grave, so they're interlinked. Newspapers.com is, we were able to mail them our old school microfilm rolls, and they scanned them, digitized them, and made them searchable so that if you come here to the public library, you'll be able to type in a name and then search the entirety of the Leaf Chronicle all the way back to 1819, and just everything in between. It's a phenomenal, fantastic source. But we're going to focus on Ancestry. So it'll be the first link here. I'm going to click in, and then you'll see Ancestry on your screen. On the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see kind of an abbreviated Clarksville-Montgomery County. It'll be on the upper right-hand corner up here, there. Like I mentioned before, I'm not African American. I'm not even from Clarksville. I'm kind of a transplant. My father was in the Army, and we moved here in 1994. So I asked myself, how do I do this? How do I help folks? How do I help folks at home and here at the library? So I said, all right, so let me get a telephone directory. Because of segregation and just how the times were, the telephone directories, and this is one from 1917, has African Americans as listed as colored, C-O-L. And when you flip through, I flipped through and I said, let me pick somebody at random, which I did, and I picked James Clardy. Should have marked the page, but here he is. Yes. So he's about halfway through the page here. It says Clardy, James, and in parentheses, it shows colored, C-O-L, meaning he's African American. It also has the name of his wife, Sarah Ann. It says also that he is a laborer and he resides in New Providence. New Providence is a community just north of us across the Red River. Fort Defiance is near that area. All right, so I've got some information. I got that he's living in New Providence in 1917 or 1916. He's married, and he's African American. So I've got that information. That's all I know. But let's see what Ancestry can give us. So I'm going to hit search, all categories. I'm going to type in his name. James Clardy. And there was a section that says show more options. I'm going to click there. And it gives me an option of saying lived in. I'm going to click there. And so in 1917, the day of the publication of this directory, he's living in New Providence. Generally speaking, if I'm searching in Montgomery County, I'm not that specific. I'll say, generally speaking, I'm going to look in Montgomery County because it encapsulates communities like Excel, Jordan Springs, Sailor's Rest, Port Royal, things like that. So I want to be just really, really general at first. Montgomery County. Nope. County, T-E-N, Tennessee, there it is. I always like to let Ancestry autofill. with the results here. All right, his spouse is Sarah, S-A-R-A, Sarah, okay? And his gender, he is male, and he's African American, so I'm going to put a B for that. So this is all the search criteria that I'm going to use, and let's see what Ancestry kind of gives us. I'm going to hit the blue search button, and let's see what we find. All right, so we've got several censuses listed here. The very first one, the very first hit, shows a 1900 census. And if you look on the right, it actually says his name, James Clardy, April of 1840, Virginia, USA. He was married in 1864. More details. He's living in District 7. Because I've been doing Montgomery County research for such a long time, Montgomery County is broken up at this time with 22 districts. District 7 is New Providence. So this is, I believe, this is definitely him. I'm going to hit on the 1900 census right there, and then it'll change over to James Clardy. As we scroll down, shows that he indeed is married to a woman by the name of Sarah Clardy. We're going to scroll down, and there she is on the bottom there. It says that James Clardy in 1900 is about 60 years old. His wife is Sarah. Oldest son on this census is John B., and so on. I want to draw your attention to this last name listed as part of the household. The name is Daniel Clardy. I'll give you more information on him in a little bit. So I have been researching James Clardy since about 2017. That's when we started first doing genealogy classes. And so I was very curious about James Clardy. I've digged up everything about the man. What you see on the screen, on your screen now, let me enlarge it, are the census sheets that you can save for your records on your computer, onto a flash drive. But Ancestry affords you the ability to search, to find, and then record all that information, even if you don't have a personal account. So I'm going to zoom in on this one. This is 1870. And he is on line 28. Line 28, it's very fancy cursive here. James Clardy, like you see here, his wife Sarah, older son, that's right, Willie, Walker, Ike, Fanny, Clara. And so he's from Virginia. Wife was born in Kentucky, that's right, and all the kids were born primarily in Tennessee except Ike. On the top of the census sheet, it says the year that the census was taking place, what district. Sometimes it'll say District 7, sometimes it'll say New Providence, Tennessee. So District 7, Montgomery County, Tennessee, and then the date. Where are you, date? Yes. So most censuses were done in the summer or early spring. Let's just kind of go through some of these. This is 1870. This is 1880. And he's on line 25. Here he is, James Clardy, Willie, John, James Clardy Jr., Gertrude, May, and Maud, other children. I want to draw your attention to something really fast. Maud Clardy, the youngest daughter at this time of James and Sarah, if you notice, her age, 9/12. That's indicative of how many months she is. She is 9 months old at the time of the census, and you'll see that on there. Sometimes you'll see it even at 0, meaning that it may be a newborn or a couple weeks old, but they always want to put the months in there. And again, very top of the page says District 7, done in June, Montgomery County, Tennessee, and in pencil. That's why I always recommend look at the original document where the transcription is from Ancestry. It says in pencil, Village of New Providence, right there. All right. I had mentioned previously about how the 1890 census was destroyed in a fire. And in Tennessee, we're very lucky that we can have a bridge between 1900 and 1880. So what we have on our screens right now, is an example of the 1891 male enumeration. It just lists all men over the age of 21, and James Clardy is on this page. We're going to zoom in, and where are you, Mr. James? There you are, right there. James Clardy, right here. And if you scroll up on that second column, district or ward, District 7. Like I mentioned before, District 7 is New Providence. We're going to scroll out just a wee bit and look at, and it shows that he's C for color, or African American, and he's about 50 years old at this time. You're going to encounter an age that's not right, an age that's really close, but no cigar. It'll be an error. Okay, we're going to discover too when we look at James Clardy's death certificate, because I was able to find it. There's some errors in there, and you may encounter that with your ancestry. All right, so this is the last census that we have here. It goes from 1900 to 1920 for James Clardy. Like I mentioned before, he was not on the 1910 census, and sometimes if you have time, you can search for a particular district. The Ancestry has District 7, New Providence, all by itself. It's maybe about 10 pages. So you can go through page by page just to double check and make sure. And he's not on it. And so here he is in 1920. He is a widower. Miss Sarah has died. And here he is, James Clardy. He's living with his daughter Hannah and his grandson Oscar in New Providence still. For those of you who are from the Clarksville-Montgomery County community, his home, his property, was very close to Tabernacle Church. It's located on New Providence Boulevard. We here at the Clarksville Public Library, we have access not only to census information and books and things like that. We have telephone directories. We have some going back as far as 1865, which listed, granted they didn't have phones, but it did list individuals living on certain addresses. And we happen to have 1911 and 1912. So here he is on the 1911 and 1912 telephone directories. We have a couple of those in our genealogy room, and you should be able to find them at your local genealogy room as well. So I zoomed in a little bit, but here is James Clardy and his wife Sarah living in New Providence. Great links, great resources. Another source, which you see on your screen right here, this is the deed that James and Sarah had purchased from H.C. Merritt. H.C. Merritt owned their lot of land, and they purchased it from him. This is from 1898. Yes, this is April 18th, 1898, and it's located in the deed books. We have them in microfilm. We also, the Montgomery County Archives has them in a digital format, but here there is a deed of them purchasing land. James Clardy and Sarah Clardy were wed in 1866 in Montgomery County. And I have a record of it right here on your screens. And where are you? Right here. The very bottom. James Clardy to Sarah Ann Clardy. And with some of the research that I had done, and we may talk at a later date, not today, H. Clardy is the same person up here, Henry Clardy. Henry Clardy married a woman on the same day, Sophie Moore, and they were witnesses to their respective wedding ceremonies. Henry Clardy is the brother of James Clardy. Henry Clardy was also taking care of their mother. So you may be able to stumble across by accident some of that kind of connecting information. I want to show you what a slave schedule looked like. I had suspected that J.W. Clardy was James Clardy, I'm mentioning a lot of names here, was his slave owner. So this here on your screens is a 1850 slave schedule. And on the top, it says civil districts 1 through 4 for Montgomery County, okay, in Tennessee, and December 7th of 1850. So we're going to come down, and where are you, Mr. James Clardy, or Joseph Clardy, excuse me. Joseph Clardy right here, showcasing there. And these are what I was talking about earlier about how it would categorize the slaves by gender, female, female, male, male, and then it would categorize them by age. So 35, 30, 17, so on. I believe that James Clardy was born in and around 1841. So he would be about 9, 10 or so in this time frame. So as you can see, Joseph Clardy, according to the slave schedule, has one male, the age of 10, who's black, African American, who's living on his property, enslaved on his property. So this may be James Clardy. As you can note, it does not list the name. It does not list the name. From the information I've been able to kind of find, that's all I've been able to kind of research. All right, let's finish off with two things. Finish off with James Clardy's death certificate and something that I had found when I visited Green Hill Cemetery. So this is an example of a Tennessee death certificate. As you can see, it has James Clardy listed on the top. James Clardy Sr., because he had a son named James as well. He had a junior. Says Montgomery County, what district, 7th district, or what location. In this case, New Providence. It shows that he died March 18th, 1925 on the upper right-hand corner. And it shows what he died of. And it shows old age. And then it shows his birth year and date. So I believe that he was born November 17th, but not in 1828 like this is saying here. And the reason why I believe this is because James Clardy and Sarah Clardy provided that information while they were alive on the censuses. So the earliest census that I have is from 1870 of James Clardy, and he's about 23. So that makes him born around 1841 or so. So some areas you may be able to find. You have definitely with these death certificates a death date, which helps you find an obituary and or other things. In James Clardy's case, his will was probated. And so his children wanted to find out what the will said and wanted to make it available to the public, in which it was. That's how I discovered that he had those 2 lots of land very, very close to Tabernacle Church on Market Street in New Providence. Great thing. One thing that I love about death certificates, it lists the cemetery where the deceased is buried. The very bottom of the screen, very bottom of the document, it shows that it's, by the way, it shows that his son, James Clardy Jr., is providing the information. On the right, in section number 19, it says Green Hill Cemetery. Your local genealogy in your library, your local genealogist, your local genealogy department in the library, and the archives of your respective county has all that information for the most part. Green Hill Cemetery is located behind Tabernacle Church, where James Clardy lived. With permission from Green Hill Church, I was able to visit Green Hill Cemetery. And if ever you are visiting a cemetery, especially if it's on private land or you have to go through private land, always get permission from the landowner. Because the last thing that anybody wants is somebody, going through their property. But I got permission from Green Hill, and I was able to find something very interesting and wonderful. I had found a headstone, and on your screen, you'll see the name Daniel Clardy right there. This is the son of James and Sarah Clardy. Sadly, Daniel died in 1915, and note the date, the birth year. It says that he was born August 19th, 1898. The 1900 census had him born in 1890. So granted, it's off by 8 years, a significant portion. But you're able to find corrections of things when visiting cemeteries, when looking at original documents. That's one thing I always want to encourage you to do if you can. Visit cemeteries, visit the archives, visit your local public library that has a genealogy department. I want to encourage everyone to always look. Don't get discouraged. There is always proof written down of your ancestries. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope that this class, though brief, is very helpful to you, and hope you join us next time.